All right, we now welcome on Charles Boehm. He's a national writer at MLSsoccer.com, freelance journalist at Pro Soccer USA, SoccerWire.com, and more. We'll be talking a bit about the Champions League, recapping the semis, looking forward to the Champions League final, and we'll also be discussing kind of the fallout from the whole Super League mess. So thanks so much for joining us, Charles. Really excited to talk with you.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. Well, I'll just start off. Admittedly, I'm not the most up to date on soccer. Dylan definitely is more than myself. So I just wanted to hear from you, like as someone who hasn't watched every single game, like what are the key storylines I need to know heading into the Champions League final? Any like background info or things I should be paying attention to?
Yeah, so I use this term drinking from the fire hose in this business a lot because there's always a soccer game happening, especially post COVID. So you can be forgiven. There's literally competitions constantly. Um, yeah, so it's been a really even by the standards of top level European soccer, it's been an insane kind of weird spring so far with sort of lots of drama on the field and off the field. So I want to make sure we go in the right direction. So guide me back onto it if you need to. But of course, the Champions League is the summit. It's the pinnacle of the sport, probably the highest level and of play and highest concentration of elite players in the world in these, especially these four semifinal matches that we've been treated to. So. And it's, I guess on paper, you would say, hey, the rich guys are in the final again, right? The two of the richest teams from the richest league in the world in terms of the English Premier League and Chelsea and Man City have reached the final. Well, big surprise, but the way they got there was really fascinating. A lot of very sort of taut, frenetic, dramatic matches. And of course, here in the U.S., I'm really pleased with the coverage that we're getting on CBS. A newcomer to the sport who's really seems to have embraced it and has captured these moments well. And of course, we've got our particular angles here. We have an American on both of these two finalists. So Zach Steffen is a backup goalkeeper for Man City, and Christian Pulisic, who really sort of grabbed the spotlight in ways that even Christian Pulisic fans maybe didn't expect or were blown away by in the semifinals. And so we know now that for the first time ever, we're guaranteed an American winner of the Champions League, which is maybe a little bit of a side note, but it's still a pretty cool metric to sort of kind of a signpost in terms of this slow, agonizing, steady climb of American players into the world's biggest teams and biggest competitions and moments. And then, of course, simultaneously, almost alongside it, we have this like stranger than fiction kind of situation with the European Super League, which is a very old idea. This is an idea that in general concept dates back to, gosh, almost to the start of the modern Champions League as we know it, sort of in the 90s, early 90s. And it's been kind of bandied about. It's mostly been used as leverage, just in sort of general boogeyman idea that everyone's been afraid of in terms of sort of disrupting the balance of European soccer, right? That the rich would eventually get tired of the status quo, even though they are big beneficiaries from it. But there's always been this idea of this denser concentration of elite teams to create more of the matches that everybody in the world wants to watch, right? If you guys saw any of those semifinals, right, to have Man City versus PSG and then Chelsea and Real Madrid, these are the games that people pay to watch. These are the games that people build their lives around. I mean, millions, if not billions of people around the world are living and dying on those results. So of course the money people, and unfortunately or maybe for better or worse, they're mostly men, so we can say money men in most situations because it's overwhelmingly rich guys want to have more of those games. They want to make more money off those games. They want to make themselves more I guess dominate even more the game because they feel that is what their levels of talent and stardom and wealth deserve. So the Super League has a kind of a general idea that's kind of come and gone in these various forms. And then finally, out of the blue, with very poor planning, very little warning, this group of European elite clubs to sort of the word leaked that they had been sort of crafting this thing, and in a 48 to 72 hour period, it went from this crazy gossip column sort of vague idea of something happening to, wow, this is really happening. Wow, people really hate this idea. Oh my gosh, they've done this terribly, and now they're running away from it, all in the course of 3 days, right? And the fallout is still happening up to this moment because the UEFA, the governing body of the sport in Europe, is determined to not only to sort of stop this from happening, but they want to punish anybody who's involved in it, demand public contrition, and try and set up as many guarantees and agreements as possible that prevent it from ever being conceived of in any way, and sort of herd these renegades back into the flock. So it's been a really fascinating spring.
Yeah. Well, I'd say I feel pretty good about our questions that we prepared, because you kind of basically hit all those notes right there. That was a very, very succinct, very well done summary of everything that's going on right now. So I kind of, there's a lot that you just touched on. One of the things with the Super League,
from the fire hose, like I said,
Yeah. Before we get into the Champions League final, just a little bit more on the Super League. You kind of mentioned like the really quick rise and fall of the league. Between 48 and 72 hours, it went from this kind of half fleshed out idea to this is really happening to this isn't happening anymore. What are your thoughts on, like, was this just an extremely poorly planned like PR rollout? Did the owners truly not expect this kind of backlash? Like, what do you see happen? Because it's shocking to think that these brilliant, super rich billionaires could poorly execute something as badly as they did,
That's what I kind of kept marveling at, both sort of in my internal monologue and then in conversations and processing, and then in sort of talking to people about it on Twitter and stuff. Like, these are sort of serial winners, both on organizational and individual levels, right? And the amount of wealth and power and connections that these clubs and their chief executives and owners have is enormous. And so I'm still in disbelief that they hashed this up so badly. And I think what you had was, I mean, we'll probably be dissecting this sort of like Enron style, right, or whatever, like for years, because the sort of best, I guess, short version of what I surmise happened was that you have this gathering of alphas, right, who are, even if you just look at the Premier League, right, it was the quote unquote big six, but even within that group, so that, you see what they did, they clearly see themselves as so far ahead of most or all of their domestic competition that they just have to go and set up their own thing, right, that's worthy of their level. And yet there's also intense rivalry and dislike, right? So you have, the other clubs, there's the old money and the new money. There's the sort of foreign-owned clubs versus those that still have, ownership in their domestic country. Then there's the people that want to make money, or at least support themselves. Like, so for example, the ownership model of the Cronkies and the Glazers at Arsenal and Man United is sort of their custodians, and also sort of, for lack of a better term, kind of leeches or remoras on the club itself. And then you have the sport washing vehicles, the sort of sovereign wealth funds of Qatar and the Emirates and stuff, who are spending enormous amounts of money without expectation of a long-term or short-term financial recompense or balancing, right? So they are getting soft power from their investments. And so you have all these different types of rich people and privileged people, and who are sort of used to competing, and now they're going to sort of do this, I don't know, weird Justice League concept. And there weren't enough people that were ready to embrace the idea publicly, go front and center and argue the case, both publicly and privately, to the people that needed to be won over. I think that there was, as we've learned now with some of these interviews with some of the investor angel types and Wall Street types who bankrolled this, right? Who basically gave them almost like a blank check. I mean, that said, we will financially, underwrite this to the tune of billions of dollars, without even knowing the most basic things about the competitive structure that they were tangling with or possibly demolishing in the views of some, right? But just saw that there was an opportunity and just saw enough to go with it, right? And so then I just think you had this perfect storm building up of one person after another who wasn't ready, maybe didn't think every angle through like you would want and need to in an undertaking of this magnitude, and then once because there's so many people involved and so many potential leaks and so many connected media outlets around in all these different countries, once things start to leak, then you feel like you have to get out in front of it, right, and not lose the momentum, and then that leads you to make even more rash decisions and rush even more, and again, like there's power, and then there is influence, right? And so a lot of these rich people are accustomed to exercising both without ever going in the public eye, right? And we're talking about people who, even the Americans who you might sort of speculate are more comfortable in front of cameras or more in a more transparent environment. Stan Kroenke never does interviews. He simply doesn't do interviews. The Glazers don't do interviews. I mean, they don't. Not only do they not want to, they don't see any benefit from any form of transparency whatsoever. They see only bad things, and I think there's probably also enormous helpings of arrogance that go into it too, right? I mean, if you watch, like, there are these. I don't think the Glazer family, who also own the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and who sort of get this generally sort of, I think, obsequious treatment from like the NFL media or wherever they go, and so they were getting like ambushed by European reporters in the parking lots of their whatever, fancy place there, whatever, and walking to their car and having to sort of look even worse by not answering questions and pretending that this woman with a microphone following them through a parking lot isn't there. And it was just like every element, they needed someone, or they needed ideally an executive or owner from every single club involved to be ready to stand in front of a camera or a bunch of cameras and say, here's what we're doing and why, and here's why we believe in it. And so, and like, it never got fully baked to that point. And it's just flabbergasting.
Yeah, seriously. Well, it's crazy. You mentioned the JP Morgan investment. Like, Jamie Dimon had that interview where he was basically like, oh yeah, we didn't realize that fans would get so mad about it. And so that's basically saying we bankrolled, billions of dollars into this investment, and either we didn't do our research or we're flat out lying to you. Like,
from the guys who
crazy.
brought you the subprime mortgage crisis.
Yeah, like, come on.
We're going to reinvent soccer in Europe, right?
Yeah.
I think the phrase he used was, there's a lot of fandom or something like that.
Yeah, it's like, no shit. The most popular sport in the world has a lot of fans. Yeah.
And again, I still think, he was almost like a stereotypically, a ludicrously stereotypical American, right?
Yeah.
To have no idea of this like layers, century plus of history and meaning and context that he's walking on top of just by getting involved at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Do you kind of see did you see like a bit of a hierarchy in the owners that were pushing for this? And did you like see any as kind of being the driving forces behind it? I know there's some reports that kind of ironically now that they're in the finals, but like Man City and Chelsea being clubs that have come from, the down below. They haven't been a historically great franchise. They had some apprehensions towards doing the Super League. They were the first ones to drop out. Like, did you see there, was it kind of like a Kroenke and Glazer, like an Americanized thing? I know Florentino Perez of Real Madrid was also pushing very hard. Did you see like one guy as kind of being the leader among these leaders? Or was it just kind of this weird half-baked idea that then a lot of people got cold feet at the same time?
Well, there's a pre-established narrative that was very easy to shoehorn this saga into, which is these rich people with no connection to our communities that our clubs have grown out of, mostly Americans. It's very easy to demonize Americans, right?
Yeah.
These dumb, greedy Americans that don't understand soccer and they don't understand culture and community and the whole context of our passion. And they come in here with their money and they think they can just commercialize this like they do everything else. And they wanted to NFLize
exactly
European soccer. I think that's a little that taps into some very deep stereotypes and generalizations that probably got a lot of fans fired up, or allowed the sort of outrage to mushroom. But I think that's a pat and vague, or generalized and widely incorrect, because there's, as best we can tell, and I've taken a lot of the insidery kind of ITK reporting on this with a grain of salt, because there was a lot of CYA happening, right? So Man City and Chelsea, there was reporting that suggested that these teams were sort of given like 48 hours or 24 hours or something to say you're in or you're out. And they find out, wow, so 5 other biggest, richest clubs in the domestic scene right now are doing this. I've got to do this to not miss the boat, right? That's kind of, and I think there was some version of that from Arsenal people too. And it's like, kind of like, that speaks even worse of you, possibly, that you allowed yourself to get dragged along, or that you got onto this boat not knowing exactly what it was or where it was going. But again, there's because our American sporting infrastructure and the roots of it, which goes back, I mean, I've recommended everyone always, but especially in this episode, to go read a book called Offsides, Soccer and American Exceptionalism, about why America's sporting landscape is so fundamentally different. And it goes all the way back to like the Industrial Revolution, and when sports started to become a big part of daily life and get professionalized, like at the turn of the 20th century, and how our, like, what we sort of put that energy into college sports and baseball to, kind of way, whereas soccer was like, these industrial, these rural people moving to cities to work in factories now, and they're uprooted, and now the soccer team becomes their place, their sense of place and identification, and everything. So not to get too sidetracked, like there's that whole thing happening, this whole historical thing. And I think we, because our sports are all, tend to be franchise model, a lot of collectivism, really sporting socialism, right? And it's so incredible. It remains marvelous to me that the norm in most of these European societies is some level of socialism and social fabric and safety net. And yet in sports, they are absolutely, capitalist, devil take the hindmost, whatever, right? And then we are the opposite here. I've gotten to the point now where I don't try not to look at that, try to detach that from these emotional sort of value, ethical judgments where possible, right? There are certainly benefits to both ways, but anybody who wades into that world, even a global super club like Manchester United, right, that has sort of grown so enormous out of its city neighborhood roots, you're still dealing with that self image, right? And the way that these people come to their club and their support, even though we're now in a globalized era where there's hundreds of millions of people on different continents, right, who really are kind of NFL style fans, and if we're being honest, in a lot of ways, and in the way that they're able to access the club, the way they get to support a certain club. And a lot of Europeans, I think, have their local club that they grew up with, or maybe that their mom or dad passed on to them, and then they have their super club that they're also watching because they naturally develop that interest in the big competitions. But you can't go in with ignorance or any kind of unawareness of the roots, and you have to pay tribute. I mean, there's this funny thing that happens where owners, or when you take control of a club, and especially if you're not from the community or much less the country, you're expected to kind of come in and genuflect to the fans and their traditions, implicitly or actively, right? And there's things you say, there's terms you use. And so, I mean, the minute an American owner lets the word franchise slip out of his or her mouth about their European club, it's like, wow, you're dead already, right? I mean, or at least you're going to lose the public relations battle. And some of these people are accustomed to not having to really fight the PR battle, and they got worked over on this occasion.
Yeah. Well, and the Glazers have been fighting this for a while. Like this most recent protest where they stormed Old Trafford, this seemed like it was, 15 years in the making. They've been doing these kind of more silent protests for a while now, based on kind of like the Americanization of the club, all of that, and nothing's really worked. Like, do you see this kind of reaching a boiling point at some point, or do you think these guys, like, you know, the Glazers, like Stan Kroenke in particular, kind of have the mental and financial fortitude to just kind of withstand all of this?
That's the fun part. And I think, again, you see the limits of a financial power and the limits of soft power and sort of emotional power, because, and I had a really interesting conversation with a member of the Arsenal Supporters Trust when all this went down, because I wrote a piece actually for USsoccerplayers.com about the American element and sort of try to just take that apart a little bit. And this guy, I was a longtime Arsenal supporter, and the AST is this group of fans who are trying to sort of advocate for fans in general and the traditions of the club and everything. And he, there's been simmering discontent about Kroenke, and they feel like now is the moment to push for deeper changes. And they've got, the club screwed it up enough to where even a conservative government in the form of the Boris Johnson regime is ready to listen. They're meeting with fans. I mean, he's like, the ASC was getting a face-to-face meeting with a high-ranking government minister, and he was like, how are we getting this meeting? Like, how's this happening? Well, that's how badly you guys screwed it up. So now we're going to push for some kind of changes. Maybe there's this concept of 50+1 that we can get into if you guys want. That's famous and well-loved, mostly in Germany, in terms of sort of trying to limit the mercantile corporate element of control over clubs. So we may see progress in that regard. I mean, I'm a little cynical because this stuff sort of tends to flare up in the emotions of the moment, and then a few news cycles pass and we return into sort of the previous inertia. But there are definitely vociferous numbers of people who are pushing to make a legacy out of this. And I think, but again, when it comes down to the thing that fans and a lot of journalists have not really acknowledged, that I think I, as an American, maybe I'm more aware of it, is they made a deal with the devil to some extent. The reason that there's billionaires associated with this, the reason that this is such a big business thing, and that you have JP Morgan ready to write billions, is that the fans want their tradition and their institutions and their reverence for the community and the roots of the club, but they also want to have liquidity. They want to have millions, ideally hundreds of millions of dollars ready, whether it's an owner or profits or whatever, to be splashed back into the club. They don't want implicitly and explicitly, right? They want people to invest in the club without taking what they think is inappropriate amounts back from it. So they're trying to live in both worlds, and that's difficult, right? I mean, you always have to pay the piper at some point. And so I think, if you're trying to force the Kroenkes to sell, and the Spotify founder kind of noodled around in public about how he loved Arsenal and wanted to lead a group to buy it and stuff, and it's like, the club is not for sale. I mean, there's a lot of people that would love to buy Man United, or watch someone else buy it. And the club's not for sale. The owners involved were asked to come in, wanted to come in, have put in some cases put in money, and in other cases have leveraged financial control to take institutional control. And you can't force them to sell. I mean, at least we don't have much of a model for that. I mean, you have to make it such a nightmare for them, right? And you could argue maybe the Liverpool saga of, like, I don't know, a decade or so ago, they were able to sort of push out an owner, unpopular ownership group, but really it wasn't pushing out. It was just making things as unpleasant as possible. So you're almost stuck in that sort of guerrilla warfare environment where the asymmetrical nature of it hit your limits. But we'll see. Maybe there's a general paradigm shift happening. I just haven't seen it quite yet.
Yeah. Even if there's not any, like, the change that we're discussing, if there's like no change of ownership or no change to kind of like this economic infrastructure that is causing these issues, is there still a way to view the rise and fall of the Super League as a positive, showing that, like, the fan base and the media and everyone can just, like, be so outraged to stop something like this? Can that be viewed as a positive? And as well as before, you were kind of discussing the history and the legacy of these clubs. And that's something, again, as not much of a soccer fan, I just heard about listening to like a daily episode by the New York Times about it, by hearing like James Corden talk about it. Could that kind of familiarity of like the history and legacy of these clubs that came from this also be viewed as a positive, even if we're not seeing the dramatic changes that you kind of just discussed with ownership and things like that?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that James Corden monologue, because he went at some length, and it's kind of gone viral. I think you can get it on, on YouTube or wherever. He did a great job. I thought, using pretty prime real estate in his, nightly nationally broadcast show to plaintively, emotionally lay out the fans' perspective, and that's great. I mean, that is not the entire issue, but Americans who are trying to sort of catch up to the emotional currency here, I thought he did a great job with that. And I think the short answer is yes. There's already people, as I mentioned earlier, that want to leverage this moment and try and capture it, right? So yes, and of course, like, there's Schadenfreude here too, right? I think it's okay to sort of, given how much power these rich people, these billionaires have over the world we live in, there's always some perverse satisfaction in watching them absolutely faceplant, right? So that in and of itself is a learning experience for everyone. But I think it's kind of going to rumble on, because when you look back at how long this concept has floated around in various guises and permutations, I mean, that it has been theorized. I guess you want to say the conspiracy theory framing of this is out there, that, look, these guys, this was all happening as the Champions League was debating and then eventually ratifying significant changes to the competitive format. And one of the things that fans of smaller clubs or even find most infuriating about all this is that these clubs are already winning. Like, the system the previous system, the existing system, benefits them. Every whim of theirs is catered to, right? They're getting tons of money. They're hoarding talent. They're hoarding the spotlight. And the new Champions League changes, it's almost like, well, was this a misdirection to obscure the fact that they got most of what they could have possibly asked for in the UEFA sort of, process of shifting and evolving the Champions League? There's going to be, more Champions League games, more concentration of big clubs in the Champions League, harder to fail out of the Champions League in the earlier phases. So there's sort of the left-hand, right-hand thing happening here too. I mean, we have to wait and see. The Swiss model is the shorthand that's being used about this new Champions League format. I would say it's not universally loved. We'll wait and see if it, what it does for the product and all that. And it'll take a year or two, I think, for us to sort of get a perspective on that. But this process of, and I think it mirrors our society and our world in a lot of ways off the field. Wealth and power is sort of trickling upward, right? I mean, it's always being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands at the top. The 1% or the 0.1% are less willing to share and more avaricious than ever. And that's not changing, right? And so you have to figure out what the game's going to look like. Is there going to be the sort of permanent war footing? This class conflict is going to get baked into the highest levels of soccer, or will UEFA and some of these clubs and some of these supporter groups sort of like wrench some levels of permanent institutional change or structural change? I just don't know. I think it's so big. There's so many countries, there's so many clubs, there's so many people involved. And there's so many different motivations. Again, like Kroenke and Glazer families, I think money is big for them. Maybe not so the sole factor, but that's big. Whereas the Gulf states and some of these sort of sport watching projects are just not bound by that, right? Like, money isn't, they're worried about image and power. And they're looking, I mean, when you look at what Qatar is doing with the World Cup, they have this 30-year plan that they started a long time ago to, in their view, sort of like prepare themselves for the post-petroleum future and make themselves relevant with the wealth they have now before the oil runs out. And they're using sports to do it. And it's like, that's so big. Like, how do you even get your arms around that, your brain around it,
Yeah, there's been so much of this that is so big, and it's like this one thing has been such a microcosm of just like society and all the history of soccer and the history of like European class conflicts. Like, this story for me has just been like so fascinating in that regard, that there's so many different levels to it. And I mean, you know, we've been talking about it a ton. Like I also want to get to some Champions League, but this is like, for me, like I could, you know, this is fascinating. I love talking about this, and I love hearing all these different perspectives.
Godspeed, you guys. I admire you for trying to sort of connect the two worlds, because I know it's like whenever an American sports fan who's not immersed in this asks, you're like, okay, sit down, like make a cup of coffee. We're going to break it down. We're going to start in 1992. And it's like, oh my God, please.
Yeah.
Like I just asked one question, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to not dive into it.
Exactly.
And I'm probably talking way more than you guys wanted me to here, but
this is
how do you
fascinating.
begin to like sum this up in a digestible way? It's pretty hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how do you cover it? I mean, just on like a personal kind of professional level, like being someone who writes about soccer, like here we're talking about like the 30-year economic outlook of Qatar, and it's like bringing all this together. And even before we started the interview, we were talking about how like, you know, there's always soccer games going on. There's all these different leagues. There's, you know, there's so much to unpack just with this Super League instance. How have you been able to like make sense of it all and keep up with it and be able to like write about it and talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, well, so I'm very fortunate in that, I guess, a game I've played my whole life and that I consume as a, you know, as a fan, and I enjoy the game. So I'm lucky to be in a line of work where it's a personal passion as well as a professional tasking, right? But there's limits. Like there's just like you know, most of my daily sort of work, like my main clientele is American soccer at the moment. So, you know, I cover a lot of MLS right now, the national teams. I've covered the youth scene in depth in the past, and you sort of have to focus like what your gig is, right? Like I'm a freelancer, and if I've got a site that's focused on European soccer, you know, I get to, you know, devote a certain amount of my time to that. And then I have, you know, have the other stuff here, and you sort of have to compartmentalize a bit because there is so much. But I'm fortunate that I can sort of when my working day stops, I can still watch more soccer and not be tired of it, right? Because it's a passion. So that helps. And I think there's probably as many, or I don't know if it's proportionally more, but I know so many people that work in this sport have come to it through that sort of passion perspective, and so that probably blurs our work-life balance a little bit, but it does, you know, it makes it easier if you're watching, you know, on the weekends for enjoyment in addition to sort of the games that you're actually producing content off.
Totally. Yeah, sounds like a dream.
I mean, the money is not a dream per se. I will say, like, and this is probably a whole other episode, but like the soccer media in this country has grown it's grown immensely since I first started. I mean, I was my first like 8 or 9 years in the business. It was a side hustle, like it was a side job for me. And then eventually I was able to get into somewhere around 2011, 2012, I was able to get into like full-time. There's enough work out there that I can make a living and focus on it all the time. And that's great. I mean, it's not where it should be, right? And we still have like bigger macro media issues, like, you know, US sort of media in general, that make it too hard to have a career in this. And there's not enough opportunity for the individuals. But again, you know, like, so the more media is slowly but surely opening up to it. This current weekend, my friend Jonathan Tannenwald at the Philadelphia Inquirer was reporting on the fact that it's the first time in known history that every major US television network was airing a live soccer game. And so when you think about between NWSL, MLS, Champions League, you know, EPL, all these different, there's so much. And there's, again, I wish we had more jobs proportionally in terms of people working that reflected that, but we're inching in that direction, I think.
Yeah. I think a decent segue to the Champions League final, actually, as you touched on at the beginning with the American matchup. Granted, in my opinion, I think there's one clear American winner here. Like if Pulisic wins, if Chelsea wins, like what do you see as the impact on American soccer being? Like, do Do you think that that's some kind of pivotal moment in American soccer? Or do you think it's kind of there's a lot more that we still have to do to kind of make this, and like you said, to kind of shift the media landscape and the way that the U.S. covers soccer?
Yeah, I mean, Christian Pulisic is on a personal level, like I think he's a complicated character. He's a fairly private guy. He's been in the spotlight since he was a high school age kid, and has sort of, I think, inevitably, like, he has that sort of protective. I mean, he's a little reminiscent of Clint Dempsey, right? One of the last great stars with a global name. He keeps some part of himself private. You don't always see the true him in the interviews and stuff, but he has really shifted the paradigm in a way. Like, you never want to put everything positive or negative on one individual's shoulders. But from the time, I mean, we can go back to when he was about 14, I want to say. And if I urge you guys to go Google, like, and then listeners, like, Google Christian Pulisic PA Classics or Christian Pulisic Nike Friendlies, and you see this, like, runt of a kid in his club or his youth national team uniform, who just fell in love with the ball, was fortunate to be in the good environment with mom and dad who had played at a high level, and dad who coached and everything. He's a kid who had natural talent, and then just kept. He and his family made a sequence of good decisions to keep him on this trajectory that's taken him to where he is now. And he had the benefit of a Croatian passport, right? So his grandfather's heritage got him the European passport that allowed him to move at 16 rather than 18, which may not seem like a lot, but is a really crucial developmental window. They picked the right club to go and work at in Borussia Dortmund. He even, like, his dad relocated with him at first, and his cousin Will, who's also a professional. They made some smart moves, and then had things really pay off. And again, Christian himself is this, in the shorthand of, like, elite European soccer, he's a killer, man. He's just, he has the quality, he has the mentality. He's been so driven since he was 13, 14. He's been put in environments that continually tested him and forced him, and he's made choices, right? He left at the right time. He broke through at Dortmund and then kept pushing. And he's been in the spotlight, and so he doesn't seem phased by pressure and that kind of thing. He's been challenged with his muscular injuries, his hamstrings, and that sort of thing. But he was a pioneer. He created this pathway and showed that it was possible for Americans to climb to levels and at a trajectory that really nobody had done. And at least, even if you say not nobody, he wasn't the first to reach some of those levels. But for to do it at his age and in a way that his generation and those that followed after him, like, he's the Pied Piper. And you see now there's more Americans moving over all the time, climbing into big clubs, climbing into significant minutes and roles of big clubs. I mean, the number of Americans at Bayern right now is just wild. I mean, this is, Americans were sort of journeymen that would catch on in maybe the lower end of the Bundesliga, right? And now there's big clubs ready to pay 7-8 figures for Americans who are still relatively unproven. I mean, Brian Reynolds is another one that I think we'll look back on in the future as a watershed. So I think it's, and Pulisic is, again, he doesn't show himself. So maybe as much as we would love to know more about him, he's still, and it's such an inspiration for people, and he just keeps doing it. I mean, to do what he did in the Champions League semifinals, and to have, I remember when he moved to Chelsea, he didn't play much, and there was all this talk about whether it was a mistake, would he have to go out on loan, has he hit a cul-de-sac in his career. And then again this year, new coach, did he make a mistake? Does Tuchel have it out for him? Where's Christian heading? And then to, like, just kill it and be a match-winning personality in the Champions League semifinal. Like, we just haven't seen that before for an American player.
Yeah. No, I mean, he really, like you said, embraces it. Like, when he came on in the second half of the second, like, he made me his legs just, I mean, the player he was still level-headed play to, like, stop, take his time, make the right play. Like, he embraced it. He was, like, cool, calm, collected in the moment. Like, it's so surreal seeing an American do all that,
And I would say, like, that is such a Shark Tank. And again, especially against Madrid, I mean, the symbolism, like, Madrid is one of those, is this huge club, old money club, where they've won multiple Champions Leagues in the last half decade, right? They've been the dominant super club of the past decade, and they can get dominated for 80 minutes. They can be the second best for most of a match, but they have players of a quality and a mentality that they just need one chance. You make one mistake and it's over, right? And they've done it over and over again. They did it with Cristiano Ronaldo. Now Benzema is kind of their assassin. And so, you see there, like what Pulisic did to sort of be that level of alpha in that moment. He is absorbing those players at that level. The game, soccer is becoming, a lot of people have argued it's more like American football, where you have levels of pre-orchestration, patterns of play, the things that are happening structurally, tactically, among 11 players on each side, and then the speed of execution to absorb enormous amounts of information leading up to a match, and then process it all in fleeting half seconds, fractions of seconds, and do what's needed to be done, and like show the technical excellence. Pulisic is just, it's the modern game is frantic, and yet it's intensely structured. And so for him, like, it's so cool to watch. I'm really excited for him. And, one more big game here. Let's see if he can do it again.
Yeah. On this hopeful note for American soccer, could we get just one prediction for the final? And do you think Pulisic will score over under 3.5 goals?
The hard part, I kind of hate this, because I don't even know if he's going to start, right? And that's, again, like, I can't overestimate this, man. Chelsea is just packed with talent. There's 2 elite starting 11s on that roster, maybe more. It's just a dogfight to get on the match day roster, much less to get in the 11, to maintain yourself at the physical level, to be fit for that and available for that. It is such a dogfight, and I really don't know. That is the storybook outlet, outcome from an American perspective, I guess. I certainly hope so. I think that the form he's in right now, and we do have a little bit of a lag to the final, which can affect things a bit. But the fact that I should be able to focus entirely on that game, and I would think that he'll start based on what he's shown so far. The manager is Thomas Tuchel is very intelligent, cerebral guy. There's this German term that the German word escapes me, but they have this concept of laptop coaches. They've had this kind of generation of young Turks who got into coaching earlier in their 20s and 30s instead of 40s and 50s, and who are sort of adding synthesizing high level periodization, like performance analysis, big data. Like, there's just like the intelligence there. You never know what he's going to come up with, right? And some of his tactical tweaks have been really decisive in some of these games up to now. So I'm expecting the unexpected. But I think Pulisic has put himself in that situation, and that's all that any player on earth can ever ask for in this moment. To be in the mix, to get that opportunity. I think he'll play. I don't know if he'll start. And we see now he doesn't need that much time. He can be an impact player off the bench too.
So it's funny you talk about Tuchel. Do you think, and you mentioned his intelligence. So do you think do you see him as being like what took Chelsea to the next level, or do you see Frank Lampard as just being not a good manager?
It's funny that you bring that up, because I guess in the context that we've established here with this sort of transitional state of European soccer, right? Lampard is, in a lot of ways, who's the romantic choice. He's a club legend, just an icon, right? And that inevitably affected the way that the fans and the club decision makers saw him. He got that job too soon. It was, for me, it was obvious at the time that he hadn't spent enough time in top level management, that you can literally do it all, which he just about did as a player, and you're still starting from scratch as a manager. It's still a different line of work. We obscure that, right? We lose sight of that all the time. We see that in other sports, this idea that there's someone who's a special kind of personality or special leader or is able to sort of skip steps, and the people that even people that have been through there that I've interviewed, it's hard to skip steps. It's very rare. Zinedine Zidane is maybe the exception that proves the rule in that sense of someone who can move so swiftly from elite level player to elite level manager. So I think you have to say that, Lampard wasn't ready for that job. It wasn't fair to put him in that position. I understand him not being able to resist, but he has more work to do. He has more seasoning to gain in that sort of sphere. And so Tuchel was the right. And again, managers don't last at Chelsea, right? He could be could get canned in a matter of months. But he was the right personality with the right ideas at the right time to get their season turned in the right direction. And again, like the rhythms of the season are such that, especially in Champions League, it's like you survive the group stage to get to the knockout round, and then you can come alive. And Madrid did that a lot over in the last decade, and I think we saw Chelsea kind of do something like that. All that floundering of the fall can be, it's harder to get over that in a league setting, but in a knockout tournament, it's just prologue, and here they are.
Sorry, Dylan, were you gonna say anything?
No, go for it.
No, I was just gonna, we're running pretty long here. I'm gonna pull for Chelsea because I want to see Pulisic. To answer my own question, I'm gonna say 4 goals for Pulisic.
Wow.
over a hat trick.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. But this was awesome. This was just a fascinating interview. Really appreciate you taking the time. We'll let you get back to your Mother's Day here. But you can read Charles's work on MLSsoccer.com. You can find him on Twitter at @CBoehm. That's BOEHM. Do you have anything else to plug before we wrap up?
I think that's it, guys. Thanks so much for that. Twitter is usually where my work gets dropped first. And then, whoever's listening out there, hit me up anytime on there. That's a good place to get the conversation started.
Awesome.
Yep. Sounds good. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed it, and have a great show and future episodes as well.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.